Check two. 1, 2. Mic check two. Testing. 1, 2.
Yes, a very good afternoon to you all. Yes, we had serious lunch. Good afternoon to you all. All right, yes. May I request that all our phones are in the silent mode? Silent mode. I know you're going to use them for tweeting and all that, so don't switch them off. Just ensure they're in the silent mode. And then also just before I start, I know there are going to be introductions, but if you're next to someone, say hello to them and let the person next to you know your name before I really start. Yes, okay. We are now set. I welcome you all to the Climate Science Policy Dialogue and thank you for honoring the invitations. We are set and thank you for keeping time. I'd like to pay special tribute to the following entities: Makerere University School of Forestry, Environmental and Geographical Sciences. You may wish to clap. Makerere Center for Climate Change Research and Innovations, Environmental Management for Livelihood Improvement, WISE facility. And then there is also another entity that prefers just to be called WWFUCO. At some point, we will know what that means. Yes, in line with our program, we have opening prayer, then introductions. So may I humbly invite Daphne Kamuntu to lead us in prayer.
Let's pray. Father, we thank you for today. We thank you for the journey masses. We pray for a very successful meeting. We pray for fruitful deliberations. And we pray for journey masses as we go back after the meeting. Through your name, we do pray and believe.
Yes, thank you very much, Daphne. This Climate Science Policy Dialogue has been dedicated to God Almighty and in line with our motto, for God and my country. Next on the program, we have introductions. I know we have CVs that are quite, so what we are going, in the interest of time, it's your name, position, and the organization. Name, position, and the organization. The other details of publications, we'll do it during networking. Yes.
Thank you, Rita. My name is Michael Mboga. I'm a lecturer in the School of Forestry, Environmental and Geographical Sciences at Makerere. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is B. Kaloren Songa. I'm a member of Parliament and chair of the Climate Change Committee in Parliament, and I sit on the Environment and Natural Resources Committee.
Hello, I'm Christine Betty Nagawa, a lecturer in the Department of Forestry, Biodiversity and Tourism.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm by name's Hakim Seviri. I'm a researcher at Makerere University Center for Climate Change Research and Innovations.
Hello, everyone. Mastura Nabanja, Minister of Water and Environment, Admin Assistant.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Krutum Nampima. I work with Emily.
Good afternoon. My name is Christine Kopsinja. I work as a web administrator at Makerere University Center for Climate Change.
Hello, everyone. I'm Liliana Singura. I am a researcher at MUCRE.
I'm Haspa Kabeja, Principal Communications Officer, College of Agriculture and Environmental Sciences, Makerere University.
I'm Casemira Mariam, Web Administrator, IS and School of Law.
Hello, my name is Patrick Vyakagawa, and I work in this school where we are in the Department of Environmental Management.
Hello, my name is Davis Rabu. I work with the Department of Linguistics, English Language Studies, and Communication Skills.
Hello, my name is Sengo Aritabachi. I'm a journalist working with the Grapevine.
My name is Bernard Bashasha. I work here at Makerere University.
Professor Bashasha, that's why I requested you greet your neighbor. You wouldn't have been okay.
My name is Revocatus Chinomanji. I'm the Dean of the School of Forestry, Environmental and Geographical Sciences.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Edward Mwav. I work for Revocatus Chinomanji. He's my boss. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jalia Nambiru. I work with Emily as the programs officer. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yona Trinayo, and I work with WWF UCO. You always say WWF UCO. That is Worldwide Fund for Nature Conservation, Uganda Country Office. And I coordinate a program on energy, climate, and extractives.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Makai Okura. I work for Makerere University.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dorina Nkunda, Climate Finance Officer, Ministry of Finance. That's a climate change unit. Then I also bring apologies from Dennis Mugaga, who is the head of the Climate Finance Unit. Pleasure being here.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Daphne Kamuntu. I'm a legal officer with Greenwatch Uganda.
Hi, everyone. I'm Bioka Soflavia. I'm working with Ministry of Water and Environment as a Senior Climate Change Officer under the Climate Change Department. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Rita Nemisango from Makerere University Public Relations Office. I'm glad that all the entities that matter are represented. You're welcome. Next, we wouldn't be here if we didn't have the head Department of Forestry, Biodiversity and Tourism, Makerere University. So please join me to welcome Dr. Edward Nectar. You hear those names, eh? Dr. Edward Nectar Mwavu to speak to us. Welcome.
Thank you. I was worried that with us there was a Mugaga, but unfortunately he's absent. I have this honor to have been delegated by my dean to speak to you in the presence of the Right Honorable retired Dean of KAYS, College of Agriculture and Environment Studies, but also in the presence of the representative of Bunyoro Kingdom and also Bunyoro University, Wekitinisa Omugurusi Patrick Byakagawa. Yeah, we see you have to work for the future. Today for me, I'm excited because we are talking about a topic which I'm really so much interested in. I've been trying to work on systematic reviews to bring forward the issue of evidence-based decision-making. So when today we gather here with the policymakers and academicians with a view of trying to understand how best we can work together and push the agenda of this country our university and our various organizations forward, it gives me a lot of happiness. People are talking about academicians, that we are in a silo there, and then the other side, we have policymakers, and we are not speaking to each other. I know that for the members of parliament, they have their research assistants, and even in universities of research assistants, you have heard that Mukuri has got research assistants. So how do we bridge the knowledge gap? Because people are talking about knowledge brokering, but how do we bridge that gap? That we accept that we can all work together and impact our societies. These days, we talk about popular science. Academicians, we are publishing for academicians, but we have come to realize that we need also to look at the busy schedule of our policymakers, and we do something which they can capture as they are making their policies, so that we have development which considers science and also other areas of the knowledge base. So today, I'm really happy that we have here the politicians, but also have the scholars of governance in our midst, and then the economists, the climate change experts. We need to sit together and see how best we can work for the good of our country. Let us share the science, let us inform the policy while basing on evidence, what works and what doesn't work. Thank you very much.
What works and what doesn't work. That's why we are here today, and I'm glad we have the right audience, because we will have to end with takeaways from this dialogue. May I request the Dean, School of Forestry, Environmental and Geographical Sciences, to invite our next speaker from the Worldwide Fund for Nature Uganda country office. The Dean will do it on our behalf.
Rita, protocol should always be observed. I'm here as the Dean. Yes, please take a note. And I've not yet handed over. Okay.
I've taken notes.
Yeah. Let me take this honor to invite our next speaker to lead dialogue with us, because we are in a dialogue today. You're welcome.
I hope it is comfortable for me to speak while standing, and I hope it's comfortable for all of you. First of all, I appreciate you for inviting us, WWF, to come into this dialogue. And particularly, I also appreciate our office to entrust me to come and speak to you regarding this dialogue on climate science policy here at Makerere University. We are much delighted to see that actually we are speaking or dialoguing about something that is affecting all of us, the universe, and also something that tickles our brains to see that we come up with solutions, innovations, opportunities, and how all these can be transferred into policies that can help our nation or the entire public to see how we can really address these complex issues of climate change. Of course, WWF, we have been, since the office started, I may say about 20 years ago, I may say that this is the kind of work that we have been actively involved in. And it's the work that even we continuously support. And I would like to inform you that all the interventions that we carry out, that we do within WWF are always tailored towards how possible can we mitigate climate change, and also how can we adapt to the impact of climate change. Yeah, of course, when we talk of climate change, of course, we talk of two key areas. One is how can we possibly mitigate climate change, and how this is mainly how do we reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, because mainly we are all aware that climate change is mainly caused by the accumulation of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, of course, leading to global warming and causing a lot of harmful or negative impacts to nature, of course, and people. And now we also, of course, would like to know that we deal with, of course, adaptation mechanisms. Of course, once impacts have been already caused, they are already there, climate change impacts. But of course, mitigation might not be easy or might not be instant, but still we need to find a way how we can cope up to this negative impact of climate change. And these are the key areas that we, of course, we work in. And of course, looking at one, the mitigation component, looking at the energy component, how can we possibly look at alternatives to fossil fuels? Of course, as we are aware, in terms of energy, fossils, one of the leading causes of emissions in the atmosphere. So mainly focusing, of course, at renewable energies and of course, we also look at how we can capture the carbon, of course, by reforestation and or by planting of trees and growing of trees and capture carbon dioxide in that form. And that's why we are having actually the FRECA project that we're working on in partnership with Emily. And of course, now in partnership also with you, because now this is with support from you. That's why actually we have been managed to come here and discuss about these issues of climate change. Of course, I would like to, first of all, thank you for taking this up. And of course, one, looking at the innovation components, one hand, it's through exponential growth of the technologies and innovations that have led to these issues of climate change, seeking for how can we have a better life. But in the process of looking for a better life, now we have realized that we have caused problems to ourselves. And again, now I may say that it is again now research and innovation that is going to bring the solution, right? And that's why we are having all the brains here in the room again to make a reverse, to do, how do we call it? That reverse process of now say, where did we go wrong? If we caused the problem as a way of innovations and research, now, can we again use the back process to also think of innovations on how to reduce these negative impacts? Or how can we cope up with these issues of climate change through research and innovations? That's why we need to really embrace that seriously. And of course, as WWF, I may say that we are now working on our strategic plan, country office strategic plan. And these are the kind of issues also which we need to see how we can integrate within our strategies and see how we can support especially research and innovation in issues of climate change. Of course, when we talk of also climate change now, we can't mere talk without action or without evidence, without facts. That's why research is relevant, information is needed. But as we generate this kind of information, finding out where are we in terms of coming up with solutions of climate change, we need to have data, and this data needs to be shared. And at the same time, the stakeholders needs to understand this data, this information, right? Climate change, here we are talking about climate change at Makerere University. But how about the local person there on ground? How does the local person perceive issues of climate change? These are the people who are thinking that maybe when a calamity happens, some of them think that they have bewitched them. Some of them think that they are gods. Are they perceiving it rightly? So that's why we need also to involve communities and also transfer this knowledge on grassroots level. This requires now dialogues, coming up with platforms of different stakeholders and train them, build capacities on them about issues of climate change. We need to translate this scientific knowledge, information into even local languages so that all of us, we can do what? We can perceive the data and we can understand the data, interpret it well. And this can also help us, all of us, to monitor about how we are progressing towards reducing the impacts of climate change. So meaning there we are calling upon the issue of inclusiveness within this agenda of climate change. But these are some things also, of course, which we can look into our policies as we discuss how we can maybe make our policies, how we can improve on our policies regarding the issues of climate change. I may want to maybe give an example of a highlight on energy. We have come up with, for example, we have a platform involving all different stakeholders about how possible can we mitigate climate change, reducing greenhouse gas emissions by having clean energies, transitioning to 100% energy by 2050, a target which we are setting up. Now, how can we also have these dialogues on climate change? Scenarios, do we have enough models? Have we come up with models that show us that that can help us in fast tracking these solving problems of climate change? So anyway, these are some of the few words I thought maybe I would just highlight, of course, within my few remarks. And I don't want to take much of your time because I see time has gone. But I may say that I wish you all the best in this discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Involving communities and transfer of scientific knowledge. Inclusiveness within the agenda of climate change. Now we are honored to have at the policy level, Makerere University, we have a policy making organ, and we are honored that also amongst the participants, whatever we are going to discuss today will be delivered at that level so that we have also the right policies. So I humbly request one of us to, so that we get to know his name.
Good afternoon, everyone. Ambushed, nevertheless, I'm Deus Kamunyu Muhwezi. I represent these powerful people on council, Mwasa representative up to 2026. And I would be happy to relay anything that is of importance to the development, not only of our university, but also the development of our country. I'm at the forefront of advocating for transformative practices, which include this kind of discussion. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Deus Kamunyu Muhwezi. Yes, transformative practices, what we will get there. Yes, and I'm glad that we'll have a panel discussion later on, which is very representative of the academia, Parliamentary Committee on Climate Change Department, Ministry of Water and Environment, and civil society organizations. In line with our program, we have scene setting. And this scene setting is supposed to be handled by environmental management for livelihood improvement. Bwaise facility. Have you ever been asked, are you at the scene? So today we are at the scene, and this scene is the conference hall for the School of Forestry, Environmental and Geographical Sciences at Makerere University. But after being at the scene, there's someone who's going to help us professionally know what scene setting means. So let us welcome the representative from Environmental Management for Livelihood Improvement, Bwaise facility. You're welcome, Madam.
Thank you so much, Madam Moderator. Once again, my name is Jalia Nambiru. I work with Emily as the programs officer. The scene setting was supposed to be done by my senior, Robert Bachika. Unfortunately, he's not feeling well, so he has gone to the hospital. I'd like to welcome you so much to this Climate Science Policy Dialogue, where we want to bridge the gap between science and policy. We all observe that there is a glaring gap between science and policy, especially on adaptation in Uganda. And this gap is expected to widen. That is, if we don't take action. We attribute the gap to the low uptake of the adaptation knowledge, the low financial mobilization. From the introductions, we had representatives from the Climate Finance Unit. This is the entity we expect to help us as a country in mobilizing climate finance. So as Emily, we are collaborating with the WWF. My boss, Yona, is here to implement the FRECA project, which he talked about. And our entry point as Emily is on advocacy, where we've been trying to accelerate the implementation of the NDC. We have copies of the simplified version of the NDC, which we printed. So we thought it would be worthwhile to see how we can bridge the gap between science and see how we can inform policy. Our purpose of being here today is we want to share the state of climate change knowledge brokering as per the theme. Secondly, we want to align research to climate change policy needs. We'll have a panel where we will have the panelists. We'll have a representative from the department. We will have Honorable Songa to represent the parliament. We'll have a representative of the academia and the CSO representative. So that is why you are here, and I would like to welcome you once again and implore you to give it the keen interest it deserves. Thank you.
Scene setting done. So are you at the scene? Yes. The next is a presentation on climate change knowledge brokering. I didn't know that he had turned into a broker, but this is a beautiful day. The presentation is titled Climate Change Knowledge Brokering, Opportunities and Challenges by yours truly, Dr. Revokata Strinomuhanji. Yes, we are set for the presentation.
Oh.
Okay. So, Madam Rita Silbroka Wataka. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, once again. I'm here to
We have online participants.
So
So
as-
what we are going to do is to ensure that the technical team helps us to ensure that also our participants online are able to follow the presentation.
Okay, but I can be giving some
Yes.
preambles.
Okay.
First of all, I want to welcome Honorable Songa, the school, and to come and discuss with the academicians here at Makerere University. You are welcome. To thank also Emily for organizing, facilitating this policy dialogue. So basically my presentation is looking at the bridge between the scientists and the policymakers. So to make a good policy, you need evidence. And this evidence is produced through research. And the research is done by the scientists, the researchers. On the other end, you have the scientists, the researchers, who do the research. But as we talk today, there is a bit of a divide between the scientists and the policymakers. Because the scientists, the researchers at the university do their research. They publish in scientific journals, very complicated language, their science. Some of these journals, you have to pay for them to access some of these articles. And so the science remains there, and it is not being used. And then the policymakers, the other side, say those guys at the ivory tower have their ivory tower mentality. They are doing things which are theoretical. They are not practical. They are not relevant to the world of policy. So you will tend to find that sometimes you make policies and they don't work because they are not backed by any scientific evidence. So we conducted a study on knowledge brokering. We'll talk about what knowledge brokering is all about later. And we want to give the situation that exists between the scientists and the policymakers, the gaps in terms of engagement, and what can be done to improve the situation. I don't know if I am connected now. But my presentation is not there, so. I think we're not speaking the same language. Okay, very good. So the title of our discussion is Universities as Knowledge Brokers in the Governance of Climate Resilience, the World of Policy. It is derived from the research that we did. This is one the publication that resulted from our research. Again, I'm showing scientific. Yeah. You see, I don't know even how many people have been able to read this publication. So quickly, a knowledge broker dissembles and assembles ideas, artifacts, and even people. So things exist, you disassemble them and reassemble them for particular purposes. So he's an intermediary who is so at one side you have the producers of knowledge, and at the other side you have users of knowledge. So provides these linkages, the sources, and in some cases provides the knowledge itself in an organization or a group of organizations. So you have the producers of knowledge, and you have the various users of knowledge, and the broker is in the middle there. So, Madam Rita, that is the kind of broker I am, not the one of
I have understood knowledge broker.
Chapa Mungaro. Now, why? What was the motivation for us to do this study? One of the most sustainable institutions that we have in the world are universities. If you go into the developed world, you have universities that have been there for thousands of years. So they are one of the most stable institutions. But we find that many of these universities are underutilized in terms of brokering knowledge. They produce the knowledge, it remains there. So the universities are underutilized institutions in terms of informing climate change policy. So there is a renewed call globally. Even here you have, when you read the papers, that universities should play a bigger role in terms of informing policy, in terms of informing what communities do to build resilience, and move away from this ivory tower mentality and do more work with policymakers to be able to inform the development and implementation of good policies. And there is also the funders of climate change are coming up to encourage universities to do more of research and development, applied action research that can improve the conditions of societies. The study builds on a number of studies that have, if you go in the health sector, there is a lot of knowledge brokering to inform health actions. When we had the COVID, it's still there. I don't know if His Excellency is now very well. You could see the task forces that were being created. They were insisting on the science. We want the scientists to tell us before you do anything you want. So in health, it's quite more well developed than other fields. And even in environmental policy. So this knowledge brokering. So at the one side, you have the brokers. I mean, at the one side, you have the knowledge producers. At the other side, you have the knowledge users. So the climate knowledge brokers address a number of needs. For example, there are quite a number of people who may not be aware of particular issues, generally like climate change. Like our brother from WWF was talking about energy issues, emissions, and some people may have never heard of GHGs. So there is that lack of awareness about what the situation is or what they should do. So what is the extent of the problem of climate change? They may be aware, but they don't have quality information that they can be able to use to solve the problems. But sometimes also information could be hidden. The information is there, but it is hidden. Like we already talked about, like journal articles, which are in particular journals that you don't know about. But even in organizations, we do a lot of research and there are many technical reports. They just gather dust on the shelves. Sometimes you start doing the research and you are told there is already the same kind of research that has been done. So hidden information. But there are also other information that are not tailored. The information is there, but it is not tailored to my use. It could be useful, but somebody needs to unpack it, and then package it to my needs. Maybe we are talking about, say, climate information. The climate information or forecast that is given by UNIMA, a fisherman will need different information from a person who is going to grow, say, maize. Or a person who is going to fly an aircraft will need another type of information. But there is also too much information. Actually, when you have too much information, it is an inhibitor. Well, that's why you hear about decision support systems, because the information is a lot and you need another system to process it. So when the information is a lot, it overwhelms your brain processing capacity to get any meaning out of that information. So so the knowledge brokers then will do outreach, will get the information and do outreach to make sure that the information is disseminated. They give feedback to the producers of information. Maybe the information you are producing is not what they need. The kind of information that is needed is A, B, and C. And these are the people who need the information. We do the finding and interfacing. We contextualize the information, synthesize it, filter it, and package it so that people get the right information they need. So, and if you do that, then you have informed and aware users of tailored climate knowledge making, and they are able to make good decisions using the information. So there are different policy worlds that need climate information. And you find that most of the policy engagement by researchers tend to focus with the government, policy makers, mainly the civil servants, my brother who needs the information to make a law or a regulation, but also importantly for multilateral and bilateral donors. You tend to find that that is where we tend to focus. But the world of policy is very wide and has very many actors and factors. There are very many interested groups that shape the agenda. You have the activists, the people who think tanks, and yet we don't normally go there. And then there is also the civil society and the private sector. And in many cases, we tend to not to engage the private sector, especially in Uganda. So our research project was aimed at understanding a range of university-based researchers who attempt to engage around climate change, to be able to document the relationships and the networks that exist. We used the survey, some structured interviews, and the research was done at 4 universities, Makerere University here, in Asia, the University of Bangladesh, Independent University of Bangladesh, Corona University in Germany, and the London School of Economics in the UK. And it was funded by Rockefeller Foundation through the London School of Economics. So our approach was to understand and improve the role of academic researchers in influencing policy. So in each university, we mapped researchers. Some people are going to say, but who were not interviewed. We mapped, and trying to ask them how they link with the policymakers, either nationally or internationally. Then identifying how each of those researchers sees these 3 areas of policy world and how they see the results of any effort that they may have been doing to engage with the policymakers. And asked them how they think, how effective is their policy engagement? How do they evaluate it? So we looked at academic disciplines, a wide variety of them. How do they engage with the policymakers? Do they use formal or informal networks? At what stage of policymaking do they engage them? Who initiates the contact? Is it the academician, the researcher? Is it the policymaker? How the contact was initiated, evaluation of experiments, the details of the people engaged with, the qualitative reflections and ideas of how to strengthen this policy engagement. So if you see here, you see an unbalanced relationship in the policy world. So you see a lot of engagement is with government, somehow fairer with the civil society, but the business, no. The community, that one we didn't, the research didn't reach there. I want to zero on Uganda. What did we find out? So what is the architecture of existing networks? We found that all researchers were valuing engagement with policymakers. They think it is useful. But some people in the world of policy think university researchers are too theoretical. So while we value the policymakers think we are not very useful after all, anyway. The research had engaged more with government and civil society, but less with private sector. The engagement was at local level, national level, but also international level. One challenge was that most of the research they had done was donor funded. So where a research was not donor funded and it did not require a researcher to do dissemination and engage with the policy, they were not engaging with policy. It's only where a research conducted required a researcher to engage with the policy that they did it. The findings were mainly disseminated through seminars and conferences. policy, and you know, the people in the world of policy will not be at these seminars and conferences. But a few policy round tables, if you were writing policy briefs, and the private sector was recognized as a missing link, and the government mainly depended on media reports to inform policy. So even where a researcher has done work and done a publication, it is not until the media get it and put it in the press that the policymakers will likely pick it. So you see now the big role that the media play as knowledge brokers, also in terms of influencing policy. Both formal networks and informal networks existed, and they were quite very useful, but in different ways. The formal networks were considered to be more institutional and more sustainable ways of engagement, but they were very bureaucratic and very costly. You can imagine if you want to meet a certain commissioner in the ministry, the time it would take you to be able to talk to that person, or to invite them, by the way, to a seminar like this one. Okay. Now, as regarding informal networks, these were done through policy connections, and they were found to be actually more effective because you go to the people you know where you have the connections or somebody has connected you. But these are not sustainable because when there is a change in people in offices, then everything is lost. So it is quite crucial that you connect the informal engagements with formal engagements. You start with the informal engagements through the people you know. Then after that, you are able to institutionalize it. It's also important to use professional networks. There are quite a number of professional networks which can be used to be able to advance knowledge brokering. So that through that you are able to know the right person for the right job. So formal networks are also needed for widespread knowledge sharing and for making new connections. When you are with informal networks, it only remains in that group. But when you use the formal networks, the bodies, then you are able to share the information quite widely. Now here at Makerere University where we are, one of the challenges is that for us academicians, it's not a core mandate. When I am hired, one of the terms of reference I'm given, there is nothing like engaging the world of policy. Teaching, do teach. So they count the number of hours I do every week. Do research and publish. So they are going to count the number of journal articles I have published, and then they will promote me. There is nothing about the policy issues. So the researchers will look at engagement with policymakers as an additional activity. And in many times you find you don't actually have the time to be able to do it. Then the mentality that the university-based researchers are very rigid and theoretical. The ivory tower mentality limits opportunities for engagement. So Songa, when you mention a professor at Makerere, says, that one, this one, you will come here and speak a lot of English and I will just get nothing out of it. I would better use my time. Then we already talked about the scientific research and publication. It is technical and very difficult to simplify such a work for policymakers. So it means that the researchers need to be taught, to be retooled on how to write and communicate with the world of policy. So it is different to write a scholarly publication. It is also different to write a policy brief or something like that. Even talking, some person will come here and will talk his science and you go away empty-handed. You have not picked anything. I hope that's not what I'm doing today. So the heavy teaching load and research responsibilities as one of the factors limiting, I have already talked about that. So it means that as a university, we also need to have terms of reference that talk about policy engagement, but not only talk about them, but create, indicate it in terms of our workload. The limited funding for research and outreach. Now, because the research is donor funded, so the research agenda will be donor funded. So there are many areas where we think that we should be doing research and engagement, but those areas are not funded because the donors have priority elsewhere. So it implies that the universities and the government must have dedicated funds for research so that we can be the ones driving the research agenda. Of course, when we're doing this, I think that is when RIF was still starting at the university. So we have some money from government, but it is still quite very small. And maybe it also needs to be refocused. So the main barriers for government, they lack shared space for academics. In some countries, you will find that professors in a university have the role of as advisors in the government. So you have a professor in economics is teaching at the university, but has also an office in the Ministry of Finance to advise the government. I don't think that we still have it. The perception that we are theoretical, the government body has many responsibilities, but for us academicians, we may not really fit in all of them. The applied research versus fundamental research issues, but we also have political barriers. The issue of academic freedom that is continuously getting eroded. So you find that these days you are very careful about the research that you are going to do. You have to be, there are topics you will not research on. Like now, we have been having the LGBT. Can you risk to do a research on it? Yes? Yeah? Where will you correct the data? And they will ask you, you are using it for what? What are you going to do? But also, the researchers also need money. So they will go into those areas where they can be able to get very quick money, get political capital. You have seen academicians now being appointed the permanent secretaries, ministers, and all. So why don't I do the right research so that I can be seen? Research. So those areas which are unpopular, then now who does them? Stella. Now, coming to the civil society, there is a challenge of us as researchers at the universities engaging with the civil society. But the first most important thing is that we are competitors, because we are competing for the same pot of money to the donors. So how do we share our ideas? So the NGOs have their objectives. Maybe you are doing advocacy. So the agendas don't marry. So we rarely share information because we are suspicious of each other. But also the politics, especially depending on the, like now, if you are doing a research on land issues, in the areas where you know there are serious land conflicts, how do they? So it's quite a bit of a challenge. And the private sector, for them, it's about profit. Yeah. The incentive is profit. So if you are not doing a research that they can mirror and see that it is going to increase their business opportunities and get profit or get advantage over others, then they will not be with you. And so they are not, we don't have good so we need multi-stakeholder dialogues to be initiated to bridge the gap between the academics and the policy world. Maybe we could think about making it compulsory at the university that every researcher should inform policy. The future needs, of course, we need funding. We need to have the media, because we have seen that the media is a very important component. And having communication specialists, maybe like Rita, I am not making a case for you, but we need communication specialists maybe in each school, so that the work that we do, then these people can be able to have another eye and look at it and get out the most meaningful information that we can be able to relay to the outside world. So we found a wide range of experiences. Some are positive, as I could see, some were not positive. We found that the type of researchers, but also the kind of contract that you have at the university. So if you have a 4-year contract, some of the researchers, by the time you write a proposal, 1 year is gone. By the time you start the research, your contract is what? Is ending. So if I have a 4-year contract, why should I go into research? Why don't I teach, get my salary, and I just run away? I wish to stop there so that I can give a chance to the other panelists to also.
Yes, thank you very much. We're all attentive, right? So we wish to clap for the presenter. Have we understood the term knowledge brokers? Can I sample? Okay, I'll get problems. Let me leave that. Next, in line with our program, is a panel discussion. And this panel comprises a representative of the academia, that will be Dr. Patrick Byakagaba, a representative of the Parliamentary Committee on Climate Change, that is Honorable Vyaika Lawrence Songa, a representative of Climate Change Department, Ministry of Water and Environment, Flavia, and then we also have a representative of the civil society organizations, Mr. Paul Mulindwa. Yes, Patrick, are you ready? So I'm just wondering if we sit here, just a minute, IT team, if we sit here, will we be blocking anything here? It's okay. Okay. Let us have the panel take their seats. Yes, and just for our information, one of the panelists is online. That is the representative of the civil society organizations. Mr. Paul Mulindwa is online. So the IT team or technical team, please let us ensure that when it's time for Mr. Paul Mulindwa to speak, we are able to get him. Yes, to all our physical participants here at Makerere University Conference Hall, School of Forestry. And then to all our online participants, right now, we are going to have the panel discussion. Patrick, are you ready? Yeah, sure. Okay.
All right, a very good afternoon to all of you. My full name is Owekitinsa Omugurusi and Patrick Byakagaba, which Professor Mwavu said very well. And at the time of coffee or tea, I will offer mine to you because you did a very good job in addressing me in the right title. I've been tasked to share my thoughts on the aspect of the gains that we've made as academia in trying to address this issue of science policy in the area of climate change. And Dr. Revo Trinomuhanja has done a good job. You've done most of my work. So I'll just build on what you have shared. I want, with all the barriers that he mentioned, I want to start by mentioning some of the gains that we have made over the years. Gradually, we seem to be, the world out there, or the public seems to be appreciating the knowledge that we generate in the area of climate change, or at least climate science. The knowledge is perceived to be credible. The knowledge is perceived to be legitimate. And we are lucky that all the discussions related to climate change, at least at a global level, require some bit of science. We are using the word science here very cautiously because there are people who gain from being labeled as scientists. But we are using science to mean if you apply the basic principles of generating knowledge. So the fact that the knowledge that we generate from our research is still appreciated, I think that's a big gain. The day the public loses interest in what we generate and they consider it illegitimate, we shall have lost. So I think that we deserve a pat on our back. We have also seen, at least at the national level, more resources being put in research, either in universities or research institutions. It is still very paltry, but it is better than nothing. I think convincing at least government of Uganda to make sure that every year there are some resources that we give universities to do research, I think is a big milestone that we ought to appreciate. We have also observed that we haven't lost our position in policy processes, at least here in Uganda. I've been lucky to be in some countries where academia are actually not involved in national policy processes. They leave that to bureaucrats. They assume that academia, your job is just to generate knowledge, but not to influence policies. So I am still invited. I brought this cup intentionally. It is branded Minister of Water and Environment. I got it in 2014. And I wash it myself so that I don't break it. To show that the Minister of Water and Environment, where Flavia comes from, still finds us relevant to participate in policy processes. But I'm also certain that there could be some other ministries that don't invite us. So the fact we are still found relevant in policy processes within the country, I think that's a good gain that we need to continue protecting and securing. I see, at least at Makerere University, if you look at our strategic plan, you see it aligned to the national priorities, which are summarized both in the Vision 2040, but also in NDP 3. And in those two frameworks that define the trajectory as that we want to pursue as a country, climate change is something that is considered. So I believe that the fact that universities are now aligning their interests or priorities based on the national agenda, I think that's another important gain that we ought to acknowledge. The day they start to think that they are an ivory tower, we shall have lost it. We have the example that Revo presented over their paper. You can clearly see that we have growing interest in joint knowledge production. There's still a lot to do in terms of involving the private sector in knowledge generation. I'm looking forward to seeing papers that have been published with practitioners being released by our academia. But that's something that is growing, joint knowledge production, especially in the area of mitigation. We see a growing interest of collaboration between the academia. Rita, is this okay? Between the academia and the policy actors. For instance, MUCRI, I'm sure you've signed several MOUs. MUCRI is a center here, but we also have many other centers that work very closely with policy actors. I'm avoiding to call them policy makers to make sure that we cover even those that are rarely considered like the business sector, yet they are very crucial, or the civil society organizations and other interest groups interested in policy processes. We are still very lucky that we have some level of tenure security. I want to disagree a little bit from Revo. Why I say we are lucky that we are some of the individuals that are hired for life. We have tenure security. When you get a job here at Makerere University or any other public university, your retirement is determined by government of Uganda. And up to now, it is still 60. When we get to the barriers, I will also delve into that to show you that for an academic to be listened to, they start to listen to you when you're around 50. Because that's when you have, I'm very lucky that you are listening, but I'm sure others are saying he doesn't have gray hair, but why should we listen to him? But for you to stabilize, usually you are around 50 to be at least a global asset. You can shine in your rural jurisdiction, but globally, you might not shine as you would have wished. So the fact that we still have some level of tenure security, that allows us to engage in policy-making processes. Because these processes sometimes are very, like Revo mentioned, they are contests of ideas. So there's a chance that you're going to disagree with those that wield the power. So one of the few things that can give you confidence is tenure security. And up to now, until they change, I think we are still lucky that we find tenure security as an important variable. We also see a growing interest of academia in contributing to policy. We still have some pockets of resistance within the academia who don't think that their research is crucial in influencing policy processes. Yesterday, I got, those of you who are involved in this game of publishing, we got comments from a reviewer who said, we want to see how this paper is going to contribute to COP28, COP Conference of Parties of the UNFCCC, which is going to take place in Dubai this year. So the reviewer is forcing me to start to forcing us to start thinking about how we shall influence the discussions that will take place at that conference. But also here we know that sometimes the university demands us to demonstrate how we have contributed to national processes. So the fact that there is a growing interest in those decision makers, at least that define how we write and what we publish to also contribute to policy, I think that's a very important gain that we ought to speak about. While we have made all these gains, we have a couple of barriers that we need to be aware of. And some of them, Revo mentioned them. I might not talk about all of them that I had put down here, But one of the key barriers is the misfit of demand for and supply of knowledge. While I might be very much interested in seeing how termites survive drought, out there, government or people who work in the ministries that are responsible for shaping our policy processes could be interested in donkeys and cows. So there's a misfit between what is demanded out there by policymakers and what we generate here. But I have an obligation to do research everywhere in all aspects as an academic. I can't only work on what is demanded, because then I will turn into a think tank, which I am not. So that's a big barrier in influencing policy. But there's also another barrier, of course, of uncertainty in climate science. Things keep changing. I'm sure in the next COP, we shall be able to learn new things that have emerged. So you are chasing moving targets as an academic. And when you're chasing moving targets, you're most likely going to be perceived as one who is not providing an answer. And this is how we lose our legitimacy, because we are dealing with an area that is extremely evolving. Another barrier is the non-supportive policies to engage with the policy actors. I think Revo in a way talked about it. If there is no incentive, nobody should lie to you that academics don't like to have a good life. They also like to drive nice cars and also take their children to good schools. So incentives of all kinds are important. So if engaging in policy processes is not incentivized within the framework that we operate in, it's going to be very difficult for us to participate. So that's a huge barrier in my opinion. Revo talked about the brokers. I prefer to call them boundary or bridge organizations that mediate science and policy. I am not going to turn into a communications expert, and I shouldn't, because there are people who spend life learning how to communicate. So they're in a very good position to communicate science with policymakers. So we have to start having a discussion on how can universities engage with bridge organizations or boundary organizations that are able to mediate between universities or research institutions and policy actors that are interested in the research outputs that we have. Of course, the issue of resources to sustain these kinds of dialogues. I don't know how much WWF has sunk together with Emily, but I don't know how often you can do this. You come to this school, you also go to another school, and arrangement to be of value. As I finish, we still, I don't know whether it's true or not, but my many years of working in this university and also interacting with other scholars elsewhere, there are not so many academics who feel they have a civic obligation to influence policy processes. I don't want to mention where I always hear this, you policeman, you policeman. They ask, but all of us are expected to influence policy. So many academics still feel they have no civic obligation to influence policy processes. How we can change, I think in this dialogue, we shall be able to identify areas of improvement in that regard. And then lastly, the other barrier that I think we need to think through or think about is exposure of some academia. There are people who will retire, no offense to the people who are threatening retirement, without ever engaging in any policy process. They finish their tenure, even the contract, they finish it, and they've never been exposed to any of these processes. Not that they wouldn't wish, but maybe they have not been that lucky to be exposed to these processes. They do not have the motivation. In that way, even all the good knowledge that they have acquired over the years will remain within their spaces of fellow experts. And to me, that's a huge barrier. We have to do something to address these barriers. With those many remarks, I don't want to claim that there were few, because usually it is the politicians who say that. I want to thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you, Rita.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Patrick Byakagaba. The question he was addressing was, what should be done to align the research agenda with policy needs? And I know that he has done so well. Next, let us listen to Honorable Lawrence Songa. Now, the question he's going to address is, what are the gains and barriers of climate policy engagement processes? What are the gains and barriers of climate policy engagement processes? Honorable, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Rita. And thank you for the invitation. First of all, I will start with the name Revocatus. In Latin, that one means someone who is very quick, clever mind, readily capable of grasping and assimilating new ideas. Or others just summarize it, someone who can recall. And then, number two, I want to talk about some misconception. Number one is there are some politicians who think the people in academia do not know politics. And then there are also some people in academia who think that politicians don't know anything in academia. And then there are also some people who think gender means women. And also others think, some think that when we are talking about Islamic banking, we are talking about banks for Muslims. In the same way, some people think when we are talking about climate change, environment, we are talking about tree planting. So these are serious misconceptions that should be corrected before we go in deeper details. But otherwise, I want to thank you for the invitation. Like I said, I chair the Committee on Climate Change, and since 2019, I'm still the chair, and I sit on the Environment and Natural Resources. When we are talking about climate science policy dialogue, the question is, what is the gap in the policy? And then the question, another question is, what is the gap in the science of climate change. These are very important before even we talk about climate change policy dialogue. We must know the gap in the policy, and we must also know the gap in the science of climate change. Once we have closed those, then we can now see, can we now go for the dialogue? But it is very important in decision-making to base on that science. Then, when you ask me to talk about the gains, for sure from our story, since I joined Parliament, I think this kind of engagement has helped, especially when we were making the climate change law. And my committee is one committee that works with government, I mean all the MDAs, civil society, academia, and private sector. We want to know, we want to have this conversation with all these people, these are stakeholders, so that we can come up with a good solution that can help to make Uganda a climate resilient, or to make Uganda's economy climate resilient. So during the bill process, we had a lot of engagements with all these groups, and it helped to form what is in the climate change law now, including the role played by the negotiators, those who negotiate climate change issues at the local, regional, and international level. Then, along that line, one area of gain is, even when we come to the role, members of parliament have basically 4 roles of representation, appropriation, oversight, and legislation. But when it comes to appropriation, we are able to base on data generated by academia to lobby in our debate for what should be appropriated, what should be allocated for the different sectors. Maybe it becomes a barrier because the information we have is not enough. We really need more information from academia to help us use in the debate on the floor of parliament to influence allocation. If you go to parliament from let's say from the Department of Agriculture here, and you go to parliament and say, I need money for plant breeding, they will say that is for what? For which activity? So we really need simplified information. To close this barrier, we need simplified information, but also adequate data that can help in lobbying. But the little information we have, we are able to use it to influence appropriation. Then, of course, we have been engaging in many conferences, workshops, and seminars where we share some of these experiences. Then we did a lot of consultations during when we were making the law, to the extent that in the law, if you look at the climate change law now, we have provided for, in the law, climate change education and research. Now, what is remaining there is when the regulations are out, we should be able to push for funding for climate change education and research at all levels. I think that will help. But barriers still exist in the area of coordination. If you look at ministries, departments, and agencies, there is no proper coordination. Ideally, it is the Policy Committee on Environment, chaired by the Prime Minister, to coordinate all these MDAs. But to tell you, if you look at even the budget, you will see, if you are talking about irrigation, you will go to Ministry of Water and Environment, they are also doing some irrigation. You go to Ministry of Agriculture, there is some work on irrigation. You go to, if you talk about tree planting, you go to Ministry of Energy, they are also asking for money to put a nursery bed for tree planting, to raise seedlings. You go to Ministry of Works, they are also doing the same. You go to Ministry of Water and Environment, they are also raising seedlings. So, and then they are implementing related activities, but there's no proper coordination. But our committee is now focusing on climate change, and we want to see that all the MDAs, civil society, academia, and private sector that are saying they are working for climate change in Uganda, we must interact with them. We must reflect them in our biennial reports, since we are required by law to present to Parliament 2 times in a year as far as climate change status are concerned. So we need to know the stakeholders that are doing this by in our report. Then another important area is the laws we are making are scattered, and there is also not enough time to consult all the laws that were made before. And that's where, again, we need the help of academia, because you find a law has been passed in Parliament, but it is related to many other previous laws, but there was not enough time to consult or to review them so that we can come with a concrete thing. And then the ones made, again, are scattered. So we need a kind of what the lawyers may call a law revision. Without changing the meaning, we need to bring them together so that we can have a smaller document, but well compact, which can guide the direction we should take. And then duplication of efforts, like I've already mentioned when I was talking about seedlings and irrigation, you see a lot of efforts. But these are not only in government, even civil society. You get these days, if they say they are working on climate change, we said, okay, in which district, which sub-county, we ask. And then we call the MPs, we say, now, in this sub-county, what is going on? Because you will get 2 civil society organizations saying we are all working in Katakwi or Kanungu, somewhere. So we are very keen on that to see that we avoid or we consolidate efforts and resources. Then there are some unnecessary competitions, whether in government, civil society. Sometimes there are unnecessary competition. So that is still a big barrier. And then there are also the issue of untouchables. Not only untouchables in government, there are also some people in academia who are untouchables. Someone will tell you, I'm a professor of woodwork and technology, and I have 40 years experience, not only in Africa, around the world. So our question is, with that experience, why can't you advise government not to import toothpicks? That's the question. With that experience, you can help the government, cabinet, and say, now we can, since I have experience in woodwork, we can make toothpicks locally. Why should we import razor blades from China when we have people who can help us to make razor blades from here? So that is why the dialogue is very important. So the untouchables should talk, both in government and also in academia. I think that will close that gap. Then there are also political barriers. While here you are saying farming in wetlands may not be good for our people. Then the people are saying, if you stop us from farming, we are not going to vote for you. That is local pressure. Then we have also pressures from outside. It could be outside Africa. That the pressures are also even on the academia. For example, they say this funding is strictly to do this kind of research. So you cannot divert it to anywhere. So there are those conditions that are also forcing us not to, much as we know the issue, but sometimes our hands are tied on both sides. So from local to international pressures. Then limited finance. That's when we were making the climate change law, we wanted a climate change fund so that if you want to do a research, you apply for that fund. If you want to do anything, you apply for that fund. But Minister of Finance told us, no, we cannot create another fund. We have we have youth fund, we have women fund, we have so many funds. Now management is becoming a problem. So we say now, how can we get money for climate change? So what we did in the law, we provided for a certificate that no budget of any ministry, department, or agencies should pass on the floor of Parliament unless it is supported by a certificate issued by National Planning Authority together with the line ministry that there is substantial amount of money in the budget to address climate change. This would be a good thing to make climate funds available, but we tested it for the first time this year. Unfortunately, there are about 15 parameters to analyze to know whether there is substantial amount of money or not in the budget. They only analyzed 2 or 3. And the minister came on the floor of Parliament and said, this is the certificate, there is substantial amount of money in the budget. Now we are waiting around August, you will hear the same Minister of Water and Environment will start telling us, we don't have money, but you brought the certificate. So this is where again I call upon civil society or academia to help us. In the next budget, the moment we get the budget framework papers, we would like you to, we can support you in terms of saying maybe recommendation and so on, to get some funds to help from some of these development partners so that you can quickly analyze that budget framework papers. And then as a committee, we shall now know the position that there is either substantial amount of money or there is no substantial amount of money to address climate change, because the ministry didn't have all the capacity to analyze all the 15 parameters, and pressure were coming from Minister of Finance to lay the certificate. So that is one area we can also work together to close the gap. And then, of course, like I said, we need to simplify the research and the laws. These laws we are making, we are taking them to be implemented at the local government level. Those councillors, the Secretary for Production and Environment at the district level, needs a simplified data, need a simplified law. For us in Parliament also, we need simplified so that it can help us in that debate. I think these are some of the issues I wanted to share with you. But maybe before I close, even we still have gaps in areas like carbon trading. We don't have all the information. It is you in the academia that can help us to guide us in this area of carbon trading, Article 6 area. And then when you look at issues of adaptation, you know, the whole world is, like Uganda, we are prioritizing adaptation. Those who are in negotiations know, like Professor Okure and so on. If you look at all the NDCs, nationally determined contributions in the world, if you read, if you look at that, you will see that 90% of the NDCs are talking about adaptation. Even Uganda, we are talking about adaptation. Of the 90%, again, 90% is talking about renewable energy. So these are at the global level, and some funders tend to put their money along that line. If you see, and we are talking about adaptation, they are saying adaptation should be in agriculture, water, forestry, maybe land use or sustainable land management. So, and then when they are talking about renewable energy, they are saying 75% is talking about solar, use of solar. Now, when you ask the price of solar in the rural area, it is still high for the people. Why? Because the materials for making the batteries are still being taxed. We managed to remove value-added tax on the solar panels, but we have not removed value-added tax on the materials for making the batteries. When it comes to charcoal and firewood, we managed to remove the VAT on LPG, liquefied petroleum gas, but we have not removed the tax on the cylinders. So these are some of the areas that are still making maybe solar very expensive. So basically, these are the issues. Finally, I want to conclude with our debts, public debts. In the last budget, if you can see, we made a budget of 52.7 trillion, of the 52.7 trillion, actually what will be available is only 17 trillion. And also we are still not sure whether we are going to raise the 17 trillion because that money is not in a granary somewhere. It must come from taxes, market dues, everywhere. Now, if people are not in business, if people are not employed, again, disaster is is making the situation worse by interrupting businesses and so on. How are we going to collect the 17 trillion to allocate for all sectors of the economy, from education to environment? So that is a big challenge. Now, our public debt right now is 80.8 trillion, equivalent to $21.7 billion. Now our budget was 52. Now to pay 80, we need to budget for maybe 3 years without doing anything to pay the debt. And of these 47 trillion is external and 33 trillion. 33 is domestic. The implication is, for those of you who studied a bit of economics, you will realize that if we have borrowed from a local commercial bank here, that person will automatically, because they cannot quarrel with government, because they want to keep that relationship, pay my money, but there is no money to pay, the person will silently go out of business. So, and these are large revenue or tax paying bodies. What happens to the economy? So these are the dynamics we need to play with so that we can advise accordingly. Now, with our little resources, where should investment be? Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Honorable B. Caroline Songa. To balance the scene or the setting, we have people online, and I'm also aware that one of our panelists is online, and that is Mr. Paul Mulindwa, representing civil society organizations. Flavia, you'll speak after Mr. Paul Mulindwa, so that they don't say they are focusing on only people in the room. So to the technical team, I would like to find out if Mr. Paul Mulindwa is ready. He's representing civil society organizations, and he's going to be addressing the question, why is implementation of adaptation actions still low? Because I'm glad that when the Honorable Member of Parliament was speaking to us, he talked about the issue of adaptation. So it is important that Mr. Paul Mulindwa builds on that, and he's going to address why is implementation of adaptation actions still low.
Thank you. I hope I can put my video a little. My name is Paul Mulindwa, like the moderator has put it, and I work with civil society, especially in the mid-Albertine region. And although right now I'm online, I'm speaking from Kwale County in Kenya, in coastal Kenya, doing some work here, but lately relating to what I do in Uganda. I think for me, in relation to the question that has been asked, adaptations actions still being low and probably why, I will say, one, the whole climate science and policy for us as actors and as civil society will meet if it relates to actions of the people. I mean, actions of the people who actually suffer the consequences of climate change. The people who realize low yields from their farming practices, the people who, you know, see impacts of climate change affecting their livelihoods. So we are participating in a number of projects, both carbon projects like WWF has already said, but also livelihood projects or livelihood pieces of work at the community level. And I'm thinking the you know, the scientists or the researchers, the universities should be linking with us so that there is linkage between you know, the research that they are doing and also the practice that is happening. And I think also that helps the policy, because I know research and science is supposed also to inform policy, but also policy should be the policy which speaks to the actions, policy which speaks to the practices, or policy which is supposed to influence practice for this case of the people that we engage with as civil society. And Kison is participating in the FRECA project in, you know, Bugoma, Kagombi, and other Central Forest reserves, landscapes. And basically our work in there is to work with communities on their livelihoods, to make sure they have increased production. And for me, climate science research should be that which helps these communities to see improved yields, to these communities to make sure that they realize improved livelihoods in that way. So for me, that's what I can submit for now. And I thank you. Probably I will be coming back at a later time. The network here is not the best. Thank you.
Yes, or even less, okay. Yes, thank you.
Good afternoon to you all. I bring you warm greetings from the leadership of the Ministry of Water and Environment, specifically the Commissioner Climate Change Department, who is officially on other duties. As she has alluded to what I'm going to talk about, the emerging research needs related to climate change. There are quite a number of gaps related to climate change, and just to highlight a few of them, if you look in the areas of loss and damage areas, those who are following the negotiations, it's quite a sensitive area. Probably we could start with climate sensitive areas. For them about 6, those ones who have read the Climate Change Act and some of the research papers which have come out of the research that we've done with academia and some research institutions. I could mention just a few which I can recall offhand. Water is one of them. Infrastructure includes roads, settlements, agriculture, industry. Yeah, those ones have a high carbon footprint on the environment. We could start with that. Then the other we need high resolution climate analysis. We downscale it from the region to national, then probably to sub-county levels, so that we are able to inform our adaptation and mitigation response measures that we are giving to our communities to reduce their impacts on climate change. Then we also need to update our economic assessment on climate change impacts in the highlighted 13 adaptation sectors, which have been highlighted in the updated NDC, which was formally submitted to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change last year. That could also be a good starting point for us and our key partners to make meaningful collaborations and partners in research. Then also we need to profile our local indigenous knowledge. This is a very gray area and it highlights areas of adaptation and resilience in our country. It could help us work with local communities, and we integrate climate science with it because it has a lot of similarities across the board. It could form a good interface for indigenous knowledge and climate science. Then the area of carbon markets is also a gray area. A lot of work is being done across the country, and the Climate Change Department is trying to develop guidelines to focus the communities, because it's a highly technical area on carbon trading. We need to educate the masses about how to go about it in order to engage in this trade. The other information I would like to share is on specific areas that we could engage on in research. For example, we have inadequate baselines, for example, in the key climate change sensitive areas, which I've mentioned. We need information on that. Then also, we also need climate data sets on such areas so that we can integrate them and come up with meaningful information we could package for publication together with academia and research institutions. There's also the Uganda climate change communication strategy. I don't know whether some of you have seen it. Most of these documents, you can find them on the website of Climate Change Departments. And there's limited dissemination of climate change knowledge on a number of things that we are doing. For example, currently we are trying to come up with a climate change newsletter, which we shall be publishing twice a year. And right now we want to release this month, and we are using the theme of COP27 together for implementation. And we've engaged different partners from the donor group, private sector, and other ministries, departments, and agencies. They've come up with articles which they've shared with Climate Change Department. So the first article shall be online, and we shall share with on a wider scale on email. Then the other thing I wanted to hint about is that we also have a climate change resource center, but it's not fully digitized. And we want to put all our information online so that it's a one-stop center for all climate change information for our partners. The other issue we want to do is to collaborate and expand interdisciplinary research, looking at interaction of human systems, and we look at physical, chemical, and biological factors and see how they play out in the environment. And then the Climate Change Department is also trying to come up with a dedicated national climate change research program to ramp up the climate technology, innovation. And last but not least, in the climate change newsletter, don't miss to read it. You're going to come up with key messages for the different thematic groups which are being negotiated, and the message for Uganda for those different themes and its implications. I thank you all for your kind attention. For God and my country.
Yes, thank you very much, Flavia, for the discussion on emerging research needs related to climate change. We are going to have a plenary discussion, but very brief for 10 minutes. And I request our panelists to remain where you're seated. So it's a question and answer, but this is how we are going to manage it. For the online audience, I'm glad we will have the chat, so kindly share your questions in the chat. We'll capture them and they'll be answered. Kindly help us do right now. Type your questions in the chat. As you do that, let us begin with the people who are physically present here, Conference Hall, School of Forestry. Question, and this is how we are going to do it. Name, your name, and then the question, one question. Yes. Wow. I think she's going to help me.
Okay, thank you so much, the panelists. To me, I'm excited. This is really good information that you are giving us. And this information is also what we need also as a civil society organizations to use to develop our projects and also come up with interventions to mitigate climate change and as well as to adapt to the climate change impacts. One question which I have, I've heard all of you actually present about information generation, data generation, research, but I'm not hearing much of the innovations, technology generation. We are talking about incentives, but how can we get incentives when we are not in business? This is a challenge, but again, a problem which gives us an opportunity also to have incentives, to have benefits. So how are we using this challenge at the same time as a benefit to our livelihoods, you know, as we cope up with the climate change impacts? We are always, when we talk of maybe mitigating climate change, being resilient to climate change, we are always importing technologies from outside. Where are we as Uganda? What have we put in place? What are the policies that are supporting our local innovations so that we can also sell technologies? We benefit from this challenge. That's how we shall be incentivized. Otherwise, if we think of only depending from donors, getting money from outside and do research and implement this, we are just consuming, but we are not producing. So we need to turn it the other way around as a way of incentivizing ourselves in adapting to climate change impacts. Thanks.
Thank you very much. The next person to ask a question, please be very brief. Your name and question. One question.
My name is Doreen Nkunda. Mine is not a question. I hope I'm allowed to make just a few comments on what the Honorable talked about. You talked about limited financing when it comes to climate finance. And so what I would like to comment here is as a Ministry of Finance, we have worked with the World Bank and have received support to the climate change budget tagging, which is supposed to help us analyze our investments in areas of climate finance. And so with this, of course, it has been rolled out, but most of the MDs lack capacity. So we are working on that, and we hope that by July this year, we'll start building capacities of the different MDAs. And you also talked about the public debt. Of Of course, I'm not allowed to comment on that. But I also note that as the ministry, we are coming up with different innovative ways. In the climate finance space, I can talk about the debt for nature swap, which we've already started having negotiation engagements with the IUCN that is supposed to help us engage our development partners, especially our creditors, mostly multilateral donors. And so we hope that with these kind of financing mechanisms, we'll be able to address that. Already we have had nature for debt swap under Spain. And so we also hope to pioneer on this one to see whether things can work out as we work towards addressing our public debt. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was very important information about financing. Next, only this side.
Last one on this side.
Okay.
Thank you for the presentations. I think my comment is towards the contribution by the Honorable Lawrence Songa. You mentioned the difficulty. Well, I'm Gerard Eilu from Forestry here. You mentioned about the difficulty with the coordination issues. And I think you mentioned about the certificate as one of the ways. I wanted to know whether, is that the only strategy and do you think it's effective? So probably you could highlight a little bit because the danger is that there is a duplication and of course inefficiency in the utilization of resources. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let us have one final question. Still this side? Okay. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Mine goes to Honorable Songa. Last year, I'm from Greenwich, Uganda. Last year, we did a research about the preliminary assessment of the laws on plastics in Uganda. And we wanted to engage the Parliamentary Committee on Climate Change. We actually reached out to you and we wanted to have an engagement and interaction regarding the same, but we were unable to get the opportunity. We also launched the same report at the start of this year. And we gave an invitation to the committee, but it was not represented. So yeah, my contribution is that maybe the process and the interaction should be made very flexible and easier, and you should actually always maybe attend to these engagements and listen to comments and ideas from civil society organizations. Yes, just maybe the other thing is that we have that report. It's available for everyone who would want to have a look at it, and it's free. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Do we have any questions online from?
Thank you so much, Rita. We had one from Samuel Okrut. He works with WWF. He's asking how then should we, how should the traditional science stroke in the He's asking how should we marry the traditional science stroke indigenous technology with the university science so as to influence policy. The second one, I think it was answered as Prof. Revo was presenting. And the other one is saying there is need to focus on adaptive and relevant communication. The other question is what could be the problem for the narrative on
on the academia having no obligation to influence policy processes. That one was directed to Professor Byakagawa. Again, Samuel came back and said, as we discuss science policy, at what point do the rights holders and other stakeholders come in? How do the communities come in to influence policy? In other words, how do you have inclusive policies? Then we have Mr. John Kaganga. He's saying, not until we budget for brokering and the knowledge generated by both government and donors, informing policy will remain a problem. Then the other one says, science policy conversation is complex to MPs. Even if we simplify it, they can't communicate and translate the science into policy products. First of all, we need to be proactive and first interest them before we come up with our policy products. Emma. Projects, I haven't captured them.
Time. Council member might fire me, okay? But before I get to the council member, just name and question. Let us be brief with the questions.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Richard Hamba, and just want to speak to the limitations, of course, of some of the findings, because our research probably is either very seasoned or target specific. So narrowing on some of the specifics of what it must spell out to. So which means that maybe it may not be able to speak to the next steps. Yet we want to maybe use the same information as a recommendation for planning. Maybe if you're talking about pandemics, are they repetitive? Are they reoccurring the same way? Are we using the same measures of redress? Because maybe they're rooted in such a way that they're basically talking about readiness. Thank you.
I thank the panelists for a very informative discussion. Mine is about this theoretical talk always that I hear, and it bothers me because from the knowledge point of view, theory has always guided practice. So who is not understanding here? Because definitely, if you take science to my mother, she won't, I mean, she's an illiterate, she won't understand much. So is the issue, maybe to honor, is the issue maybe to the parliamentarians and policymakers of failure to understand our language or to understand the science? And then how come when these scientists, some of my colleagues here, have worked in foreign labs and have contributed to progress in several areas of work, including Mr. Byakagawa. He talks of Brown University a lot. How come their ideas are taken seriously? So I want us to rethink, because it's defeatist and it's common talk, and we need to deconstruct it, Honorable. For a policymaker, a people at that, to say you are too theoretical is very disturbing, because we know that theory guides practice. Then that means whatever is being done there is either vurugu, or maybe people are concerned about attending funeral and they are not listening carefully. But I can understand if the language, they will require that the language be toned down and maybe engage more and discuss more. But to say too much theory is very defeating, because the same people guide foreigners and they succeed. The same people guide World Bank. Your information being gathered here is guiding World Health Organization, is guiding World WFP, is guiding. But how come it is not guiding our parliament?
Finally, this is the last question.
Thank you so much. My name is Davis.
I would like to thank Dr. the Dean for his presentation. And I think it raises maybe one comment that is climate science or climate knowledge based in disciplines that are concentrated in the sciences. I would assume that maybe even other disciplines, communication, the language, even with education today, with the new curriculum, many of the teachers are now finding projects for their students to do in areas of environment, on climate change and the like. So I think as we talk about knowledge brokers, I think there are some knowledge brokers who do not know that they are brokering in some of the of this information. And then also, who are the consumers of this knowledge that you are brokering? I'm sure if we think more about the consumers, then it would give us guidance on who we should target for this information. Are we producing knowledge for knowledge's sake to remain in the laboratories? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Let us allow the panelists to respond to the questions. I'll start with Honorable, because I feel most of the questions we are really targeting you.
Thank you, Professor Il. You talked about is the coordination certificate the only area? I think I will throw that question back to you. We need to find out other innovative ways which we can use to get more resources, whether for implementing activities or for research. I think that is very important. We can still explore more other areas so that we see, apart from certificate, what else can we do? For example, we have climate finance unit, and people are already running there thinking that they have a lot of funds. We are telling them they're still putting the framework in place. But my appeal to them everywhere is, and we are very keen, we are going to invite them very soon to the committee. They must work with all the other MDS so that we move together, so we can explore other areas and explore other strategies we can use. On the greenwash, the question from greenwash, first of all, we are sorry for missing all your activities. But I think what we can do is to arrange a meeting with the committee so that a team from Greenwash can come, and then we can share more of the things we want to do. You talked about the plastics. I think there are many issues surrounding that. So we can arrange, and we have a meeting with the committee, especially in July when we are starting. Then Professor talked of we can advise other universities, other governments. It's working. How come it's not working in Uganda? I think that is again a question for your research. You do more research. Why is it not working in Uganda, but it is working in England, it's working in Norway? Why is it? But possibly, I don't want to preempt what you are going to find, but possibly because one, there are people who don't read. Two, we are coming from various backgrounds, and the area where you may be advising may not be within the reach of that person. Then three, that person is also not speaking on behalf of all the members of parliament. He's free to say what he thinks is good because of the background. But that's why we say such issues need to be filtered and you go to the relevant committee, because in the committee leadership, they don't appoint people anyhow. They also look at your background and what you were doing before. And then the other members may be anybody, but the leadership is, if you're in finance, they have to put someone with finance background. So it's not anyhow. So there are many factors, but you can explore more. Why is it not working? But also it could be the question from the one I talked about, untouchables. There are people who think they have maybe connections and they just say anything. So it's not the position of parliament. We really want to work with academia, like especially in my committee and some few others. We want to work because there is no way a member of parliament will be successful without data from academia, without data from local government. You cannot do any meaningful work. So we have to work together. But we need more research. But if the person say you are too theoretical, you can say you are too practical. You can say to the person, and then you will reach a dialogue. Now for you are very practical, for you are theoretical, but let us talk about this. I think that will be important. And then I think those are basically the innovations. Maybe someone else will with incentives, but in the law we have also provided for incentives. If someone is promoting energy saving stoves, why don't we give some incentive for that person? But also, local technologies. Finally, I want to conclude by saying there are complex issues like oil and gas, where the SDG is saying leave the oil underground, but developing countries are saying no, we need that money to become like another Dubai here. So this is an area where academia can help us, like they help on when we're talking about homosexuality. Why can they also help in this area? Because the argument in oil and gas, because someone is saying the amount of oil we are importing from outside is too much. Leave alone the importation. If you take at the greenhouse gas emission because of this transportation alone, if actually water down what efforts we are trying to put in place. So that kind of argument should come out. Then finally, the issue of transition is still complex. Why they are saying we should transition to renewable energy, but people in the rural area are using firewood and charcoal. So which transition are you talking about? So there are issues academia can help. Thank you.
Yes, Flavia, would you like also to respond to a few questions that were raised?
Thank you, moderator. I'll talk about how to integrate climate change knowledge with climate change science. Actually, there are similarities and variations if you know some indigenous knowledge related to some of these, the Baganda call it ngero. Like, for example, in Karamoja, when they see certain birds, they relate it maybe to change of season, they are not really using these weather forecasts. And some of this indigenous knowledge seems to be accurate with some of this climate science, that maybe the season is switching or something, but some are really divergent. By the way, it could help us demystify some of these things that we have at the community level, which people are still using and they are not really believing this climate science, for example, the weather forecasts that are being disseminated. Then the other issue on innovations and technology, I just wanted to find out from the gentleman who asked that question, which negotiation stream are you following on climate change? If you don't mind, I can recommend the technology transfer and development. Your ideas would fall in very well on international patent rights for those locals you're talking about who have those technologies that they've developed. You could support in that area and you take it to another step. That is my suggestion. Then my 10 cents on why this scientific knowledge is not being absorbed or used. I would recommend to academia and research institutions. For example, I'm sure you're churning out every year a number of masters and PhD students, and where are these dissertations? I imagine maybe they are on the shelves in the library. You could maybe task them to translate some of these scientific publications for research scientists into simplified articles for public newspapers and social media platforms to enhance their visibility and uptake of this information for policymakers and practitioners for use to influence their decision-making and practice at the different levels where we are working. That is just my suggestion and a personal opinion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we still have some journalists here? I want you to take keen interest when our students are graduating. Usually all the PhDs as graduates, journalists speak to them. I'm always curious to see what kind of questions they ask these people. They ask their villages, whether they are married, number of children. Like 3/4 of the questions are on personal matters. No offense to our journalists. You see, that's one of the challenges that we have. But I totally agree with you that we need to find a way of translating some of this information. I had a few questions, I think, that were directed to academia. I hope I'm representing the academia very well. There's a question on this narrative of the academia not having a civic obligation to make a contribution to policy processes. I think we are losing our status in society in terms of expectations. And there are many reasons as to why. Part of the reason, of course, is that we probably have many average people. I use the word average very cautiously. We seem to be glorifying people who don't know. Society tends to glorify people who have limited knowledge. People are even proud to say they didn't go to school. So you have a community that celebrates not going to school or being illiterate. So you, with your several degrees and exposure, you're perceived as an outlier. So we may have to work very hard to recapture our space in society. We are still lucky that the judiciary still recognizes us. They look for expert opinion when they are making judgments, and expert opinion cannot be challenged. So if the judiciary is still recognizing us, we ought to work very hard for policymakers and all the other actors involved to recognize our contribution. But also, we need to cultivate the culture of this civic obligation within amongst ourselves. Not all of us have the same belief that we have a role to play in shaping the discourses, national discourses. I usually, when I earned a PhD, I said, now finally, the journalists are going to say, Byakaggaba said of Makerere University, because now that becomes law. My opinion becomes law because the assumption is that I have expert opinion. So unless you have adequate evidence that can challenge what I'm saying, the best you can do is to keep quiet when I've given an opinion. So we need to grow this, but that takes a lot of time and investment in terms of what research we do. Then finally, there was a question on, I think it was the WWF who raised it, on innovations. Yes, I totally agree with you, much as the convention talks about transferring technology to developing countries, but we haven't achieved yet on that, and all the COPs we have not been able to achieve on technology transfer. So what that means is that countries like Uganda need to invest in innovations. I totally agree. And I don't want to speak on behalf of the university because here she does speak for the university together with the VC, but I will speak what I see. We have a number of innovation hubs. The idea of having innovation hubs within the university is growing. Rita, correct me if I'm wrong. And we want to believe that some of these hubs are going to address some of the challenges related to climate change. These innovation hubs can only be effective if they are supported. So gone are the days when we only talk about publishing, but we're also thinking about addressing challenges, the current challenges and future challenges through innovations. We even have a policy to patent some of the innovations that we have. The biggest challenge we have is working closely with the industry, because it takes some level of investment for industry to pick interest in what you have innovated at a university. It means you have to reflect on your policies to attract industry to come and invest in the innovations that you have developed. I, as Byakaggaba, I will not have time to continue with the innovation, but industry should be able to pick on what I've innovated to commercialize it. Because it's not in my, I don't even have the experience or the expertise or probably even the motivation to continue with the commercialization. But I would like the money that will be generated from the commercialization, because money is a universal good that everybody likes to enjoy. Finally, Rita, with your permission, the issue of indigenous knowledge versus Western knowledge. I think as a university, we believe in knowledge pluralism, which is a principle that is not very popular. People would wish that we all think in the same way. But a university worth talking about should appreciate that knowledge can come from different streams. And indigenous knowledge is very crucial in climate change matters. The example she was giving of the people of Karamoja, for me, I mostly studied trees most of my professional life. There's a tree called shea butter. I don't know whether you've heard about it. People know the product, but they don't know the tree. But there's a tree called shea butter tree. Our people in the north use it to predict the weather based on the flowering time and the fruiting time. If it flowers early, then it means the dry season is going to set in early. And the rain season therefore will come early, because if it rains when they are flowering, then the flowers will abort. So once they see them, then they start to prepare their land. They didn't go to Makerere University to study phenology, but they have monitored this particular tree. And our people of Nebi have worked very hard to make sure that they have cleared that tree. I'm sure even in your constituency now, it's just a rumor that we used to have this tree. So that means that that knowledge is lost. So in other words, as we work towards integrating these different knowledge systems, let's demonstrate the value of indigenous knowledge in informing some of the Western knowledge. These two can go hand in hand. Thank you very much. And thank you for the information from Minister of Finance. I truly appreciate that you are making an attempt. My only comment on that, the debt swaps, I do hope, indeed do hope, that when we have these swaps, the money will go where it's supposed to go. I'm going to keenly follow this, and I think civil society organizations also need to pick a lot of interest in this. With those many good questions, I thank you very much for your kind attention. Back to you, Rita.
Thank you very much. Yes, you represented the academia so well. And I confirm that we have the Makerere University Innovations Hub. And our focus as the university is going to ensure that the information or knowledge created through research by both our staff and students informs policy communities, but also we come up with innovations. Yes. Now we have Mr. Paul Mulindwa. Remember, he was one of the panelists. I wanted us to give him maybe 3 minutes to also respond to some of the questions. Paul Mulindwa, one of our panelists, is he still online? Okay. Oh, all right. At least we had given him an opportunity. So let us have Dr. Revocatus. You recall they informed us what that name stands for. Trino Muhanji, to also respond to some of the questions.
I hope my head of department had the meaning of the name very well. Okay, I think there were some few questions where I could give some responses that were touching on my presentation, and I want to start with the theory issues. I think these are just stereotypes, biases. Honorable Songa will agree with me that the academia and the politicians also compete for space. And the politicians and the policymakers have the resources, they have the platform, and you know, in our development, we have this intergenerational equity and intragenerational equity, because the politicians want to solve the contemporary problems, maybe poverty, but the lack of money, Song at the next election, You want to do things which will make you retain power. This academician here is theorizing into the future. Now, why do we theorize? Every time you ask a question, you are theorizing. Every time even you want to make a plan to do something, you are theorizing. The reason why we theorize is because we want to explain. We want to explain what is happening, why it is happening the way it is happening, why it is not happening the way it should happen. And by explaining, then you are able to predict what is likely to happen. And when you predict, then you can control events, control the future. So the theory goes so much in the future where a policy person or the politician is not willing to look into because they are pressing problems for the day. So it's about reorganizing ourselves so that we know that both theory and both practice are very important and they inform each other, because the practices we are doing today inform theory, and the theory will inform what we can be able to do together. But Dr. Kamunyu, incidentally, even in the findings from the London School of Economics, even there is that divide between the academicians and the policymakers, and they are saying they are theorists. Of course, it is only the degree, not the kind. So theory links with innovation. You cannot innovate without theorizing. You know, a medical doctor, when they are these normal dispensing of drugs, you know, you have come with malaria, you go to a lab and yeah. But when the things become hard, they go back to the reading. So the theory is the technical backstopping when things become hard. When the COVID came, he's talking about the rats. You better be careful with the rats. So it is the technical backstopping when you have problems. And so it goes with the innovation. And for you to innovate, you need the triple helix model of innovation. You cannot innovate alone as an academic or a business entity or government. You need both the academia, the industry, and the government. And by doing so, then you create a knowledge society. Now, climate, is it a science? Yes. When you start explaining, is climate change there? What causes it? And all the like, it becomes a science. But for you to address it, you need the human being. So when you are talking about adaptation, when you are talking about, say you can innovate about practices, but are people going to adopt them? And what causes climate change anyway? It is consumption. And consumption is behavior. So without changing behavior, you will not be able to address climate change. Without changing behavior, without changing attitudes. Now, for us, our study was looking at the policymakers, the science policy dialogue. So we didn't go to the other consumers of the knowledge, but we know the community consumes the knowledge. But for them to consume the knowledge, you must have the right policies, which are showing the direction where they should go, because the policy also will influence research. The policy will influence practice. I think that is all that I can respond to. Thank you.
The dean has passed the microphone to me because he told me I have to be careful, and he has scratched me the right way, because we are debating. Universities are supposed to be think tanks and churning out opinions and advice. But apart from the judiciary, some people are saying we are dormant. But remember, our employer before you go is our employer now, is more safer. But he can tell you that the space in the universities to have free speech is so limited these days. So people are about self-preservation. They don't know what to say and what will be the implications. Because now here Patrick was talking about that he cannot do some other things because Rita is here, is the spokesperson of the university. So there's also that restriction. Yeah. So you find that you can try to give an opinion now if you say you want to think that perhaps the PDM was not well thought out. Then they will tell you this guy is from NOP. Yeah, from NOP. So people are not ready to be harassed. They rather keep quiet. Okay. So we are in an ecosystem perhaps which does not allow free thinking and free speech. You will be told these things are for the generals. Keep the matters of the generals what? To the generals. The politicians, they will say now, for them, they know better, you keep quiet. So we are in a very complex ecosystem. University would want to respond at any time, but you'll be told that's not your space. I think the journalists one time they were asking, why is it that in Makerere these days, there is no engagement of staff on matters of national importance? I think there was an answer that they are busy with research. So you can know, yeah? Okay, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. But just in a little defense, when it comes to research, all an area where you're an expert, it's not really Rita. That one, it's for the researchers and the professors to give an opinion in an area within their research field and discipline. Yes, permit me briefly to request Dr. Patrick Kagaba, because we have Pia Kagaba, we have takeaways from the dialogue, just to help us manage that, maybe in 5 minutes. Thereafter, remember we have a group photo, we have tea at the restaurant. Yes, it's a day that you dedicated to us. Kindly bear with us. We have all those good things lined up.
All right, thank you very much, Rita. It's very difficult to be a panelist when you are always moderating. So Rita has captured me from a very good seat to become another moderator. Thank you. Key takeaways, not the food that we take away when we're going to the field. From this dialogue, for me, what I've picked, I'll build from what Dr. Moab, Professor Moab has raised. That is important for academia to feel comfortable to express themselves. So independence is important. If we are going to gain a lot from the academia and researchers in all institutes, we need to give them the freedom to do research without any limitations. That's one. Two, I've also picked that we need to have, like, again, to build on Dr. Mwavu, this ecosystem of the different players in policy processes related to climate change. They fall in about 4 categories. We have government. Do you like to be part of government or you want to be parliament? They told us there are 3 arms of government. So when I say government, I'm putting all of you together. We have the private sector. We have the universities, but also we have the community. 4. All of them are important in this, in what we are trying to pursue. How do we ensure that all these 4 entities are working towards a collective good? We have different approaches. There are those who think civil society organizations are in a very good position to represent the communities. Is that true? Is it working? When you invite an ED of, I don't know whether Chikando is still online. Okay, the gentleman who leads the Chikando something. Does that mean all the people of Chikandwa have been represented? So the point I'm making is that we have to reflect on—
He's online.
Excellent. how do we ensure that we have meaningful, effective engagements with the different stakeholders during policy processes? Okay, we are missing that bit. We simply consult, don't engage. We need to have meaningful, effective stakeholder engagements. So what does that mean? It means we have to empower stakeholders if we want them to meaningfully participate in our processes. I like to give my students an example that if you consulted me, very soon Uganda is going to launch nuclear energy initiatives. Is that a fact or some rumor? Okay. But Soroti University, it's going to be our center for nuclear energy development, Ministry of Finance, fact or not, you'll not be quoted. But the idea is that we need to have different alternatives of energy. So if they start doing the environment and social impact assessment of any nuclear plant, most likely they will come here at Makerere University. Then most likely they will come to my department of environmental management to consult. But I don't have much knowledge in nuclear energy. Maybe the guys in physics are in a better position. So if you want me to meaningfully engage in that discussion, first empower me. Tell me the good and the bad, so that I'm able to communicate. So in other words, what I'm trying to put across is that for us to have meaningful engagements with stakeholders, let's empower them with the information. So now that takes us to universities, the role of universities. Are you generating adequate information to empower our people to participate effectively in these processes? If the challenge is resources, all these civil society organizations that are in a good position to mobilize resources, are they working with us closely to support us in this research that we do? So that takes us to the next level. Universities, do you have appropriate frameworks that enable you to engage with the government, with the civil society organizations, or with the community? Today, if you want an MOU that involves a bit of financing, it requires you to clear with the Solicitor General. That's a fact. Are we making it easy or we are making it difficult? If the idea is that we need to continuously engage with various stakeholders in country and outside the country, can we make these processes easy? Okay, without losing the value. Okay, so that means we need to work on to have some reforms in our frameworks within government, but also outside government to facilitate these engagements. Then the other area I picked was the big elephant in the room, which is always coordination. I've spent probably all my professional life trying to study how best to promote what they call whole of government approach of running affairs. We are a bit lucky that government believes in working also with civil society organization, non-state actors. So that makes it even more complicated. If within the government, we are struggling to coordinate, then we add another layer of non-state actors. It means we have to work a bit harder to improve on these cross-scale linkages. What does that require us? People in Africans, usually they need a law for things to move, especially Uganda, which is highly legislated. There are so many laws here. I'm of the view that let's not just law to promote coordination. Let's demonstrate the value of coordinating among these different actors. Create incentives. For instance, what you were mentioning about the seedlings being raised by the different agencies and ministries and departments. If we demonstrated that there is going to be an incentive when you work together, they will naturally work together. These civil society organizations which are represented here, I forgot to mention I'm the chairperson of Uganda Forest Working Group. So I have about 35 NGOs behind me and some universities and research institutions. When there is a donor like WWF, are you a donor or you are a recipient of donations? Okay, you donate, but I'm just pulling your leg. If WWF says, now all of you who work in the Albertine, I want you to organize yourself into a network. I have money here. They will all work together, these NGOs. Is that a fact? Now, if they can mobilize CSOs to work together because there's an incentive. I think government can also do the same. You say, you Minister of Water, Energy, you all have interest in charcoal or in energy, biomass energy. We have this fund. Demonstrate to us that you are going to work together using this fund. They will sit together and even plan together and budget together. But today, the budgets, much as we're using the program approach, still we see them working in silos. So create incentives, learn from the CSOs. And then finally, what I picked, we should continuously learn, because climate change is extremely dynamic. Things change very fast. The knowledge we have today is not the knowledge we had in the last COP. I'm sure when people go to Dubai, we are going to learn many new things. So that means learning is going to continue. Continuous knowledge generation is something that we should consider. Those I picked without taking notes. In the event that I have missed out something that is critical, please raise it, and I give back the microphone to my boss who gave me the opportunity to shine. All right? Okay. I hope I've done so. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for shining.
The Honorable has something to say.
All these things are not going to work if we still have corruption.
The easy donors like to say, address governance issues, which is really fight corruption. So that I thought was a given, because we are alone at home here, and maybe there are journalists who are very nosy, they are going to say these people are again talking about corruption. And you know them, they can say, Professor of Environmental Governance says there is corruption at Makerere University. Then Rita has to respond. No, the man said it was corruption, not at the university, but in the country. So thank you for that. I truly appreciate it.
No, the issue has been captured, addressing governance issues that might hinder what we envisage in climate adaptation and climate science. Yes, I captured something like involving communities and translating the information in simplified formats, something like that. You didn't? Yes, we are going to get from a minute for the Dean and also a minute for Dr. Revocatus to also share with us the takeaway from the dialogue, which hasn't been mentioned by Dr. Patrick Byakagaba. So
my point was on communication of science to scientific and non-scientific audiences. In that, I mean fellow research scientists and the public to also assimilate and take up this information for their use in maybe like the politicians for policy decision-making, and then the public for their practice.
What I can say is that together we can.
when you said together we can, yes. Thank you so much. Now, time in the interest of time, since you have the microphone, in just 2 minutes, kindly close this session. After the closing remarks, we'll go for a group photo and also tea at the restaurant. Cocktail of tea. High class tea.
But given my height, I have to do it. No, colleagues, this has been a very good opportunity for us to interact. And I believe that you have asked the contacts of your neighbor. And it is also important that we know each other. Some of you might have been sympathetic as a simple lecturer here, but now you have known that you have showed us with the powers that be. I've been told to close, but I'm not going to close. What I'm going to say is that let us continue engaging. Honorable Songa, you pardon us, because for us in academia, it can be very difficult for us to go with the titles. I can call him Revo, call him Edward, despite the journeys I've traveled from Africa, from Bute to Uganda, from Uganda to Africa and to Europe and the Americas. But I tell my students, call him Edward. But it's so interesting in the villages, they tell you an LC Defense Secretary, Honorable. And you don't say Honorable, then they might not sign for you. You have land agreement. So you forgive us if where we have erred, please forgive us. It is not intentional. Okay? I know that this should not be the first and the last. Please always be available to us whenever we call upon you to share. Because today we don't have many students here, but we know that the students are the future of this country. And therefore, we want them to be made aware and educated on some of the happenings in the country and what they need to do. So when we invite you, please always remember that on the other day, the person calling you was representing the dean in the presence of the dean. And this is Edward Mwavu. Today I'm the head of department. He has been calling me the head of the department. And it is also a honor that he recognizes that we share responsibility. So please be available to us, and we will be available to you when called upon to share the knowledge. Thank you very much. Enjoy the tea and the coffee. Cocktail. But cocktail means that you are mixing coffee and tea, which might be dangerous. There will be chemistry there. Yeah. So please enjoy yourselves until we meet again.
Yes, thank you very much. Permit me to request Jalia to make some announcements regarding logistics.
Thank you so much, Rita, for the job well done. Except that you did not dissolve our panel. I would like to thank so much the panelists for availing time and for the job well done. We don't take it for granted. We thank you so much. Honorable Songa, we thank you so much. You've been to Bonn, you've been to the NAP launch, and you are here. So we really appreciate the commitment. To our dear participants, I would like to thank you so much for keeping up to this time. We've passed the time we planned. It wasn't intentional, but because of the discussion, it was quite flowing, so we had to go beyond the time. In terms of moving forward, we planned to have this interaction on an annual basis, except that, as you all know, it has financial implications. So I would implore all the actors here, Climate Action Network Uganda, you are here. If you've picked interest, please join the bandwagon to see how we advance it. And especially, even the government, I see the whole team from CCDs here. Please pick it up from where we've stopped. My boss is here, WWF. Let's make it an annual interaction, because as we already noticed, there is still a very big gap which we need to bridge. On the logistical note, as Emily, we normally send the refund via your mobile phones. I hope all of us have registered, so we will send it through. We are trying to work it out with our finance person, and it will come through. I thank you so much for God and my country.
Thank you very much. We have planned a group photo outside here at the entrance of the School of Forestry. After the group photo, you earn yourself a cup of tea or coffee. Thank you.